Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is reactivity and how we can, when we get triggered, maybe how we can diffuse the reactivity and also the consequences if we don't. So before we get started on this Monday morning, let's just take a minute to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating this brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the motion, the pressure, all the sensations, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to be here with you this morning. And today we're talking about reactivity and how triggered we can get, whether it is something as simple as a sideways glance or a tone of voice, or a series of words, or life circumstances. Any of these things can trigger us into reactivity, which really is throwing us into a place in the past where we've had some kind of experience that we've brought forward into this moment. And when we get triggered in that way, we're no longer in control. We're no longer making conscious choices. We're no longer present. We're literally thrown into a past experience. And what happens is that we respond or react to these triggers with all different kinds of programmed sort of behaviors. And we become automated rather than present to our ability to choose how we're going to be. Or what happens is that from this framework of the past, we are filtering now our experience through a lens of something that isn't even there in this moment. You know, we're drawing on our experiences from the past, not even in a conscious way. We're not able to create a comparative reference. We're just in the throes of this programmed behavior. And so the question is, how do we break free from this reactivity? And it's not necessarily an easy fix, you know, because sometimes we don't even know that we're in a reactive mode. Sometimes it just overtakes us so completely that we believe that that's what's really happening. So what happens is we'll become defensive, or we'll become aggressive, or we'll shrink ourselves, all in response to this trigger, this incident, this circumstance that reminds us of something in the past. And so the question is, how do we bring ourselves back from these circumstances, or how do we diffuse the reactivity to begin with? So one of the ways that patterns repeat in our lives is when they're unexamined, and we don't get the chance to disentangle them, or detangle them and disentangle ourselves from them. And so it's really interesting. I did a session with someone yesterday where they were feeling like it was a sequence of triggers. It was really interesting because they have a situation with a manager that had been a manager a long time ago. And at that time, that manager put them on notice. And there were still some unresolved issues around that whole situation from years ago. And now that person is their manager again. And the feeling at that time was that their manager was out to get them. And they had reason to believe that, apparently. And so now this person's a manager again, and it's kind of thrown them into this defensive position, being triggered by just the presence of this manager who had been out to get them in the past, and all the unresolved issues around it. And so what was really interesting is that all of this went back. We were able to trace it back to an experience with a parent who was a really volatile parent and made their lives feel very unsafe, because they never knew what was going to happen next, when the other shoe was going to drop. And so interestingly, to go from this 8-year-old child who felt very unsafe, where this manager triggered the fear and the insecurity of that past experience with the parent. And then years later, that unsettledness and mistrust, defensiveness, paranoia, disorientation, all of these things recurred when triggered. And so one of the ways to diffuse our reactivity is to diffuse it at its source. And a very powerful technique to be able to do that, that we can do on our own, although it's always wonderful to have guidance in that kind of process, but is to be able to, as your adult and wiser self, hopefully wiser self, excuse me, be able to approach that child self to offer them comfort and maybe new perspective, and to imagine yourself with this younger self. And the thing that's really important in the process of doing this is to be respectful of that younger self. That younger self may be frightened. That younger self may be very, very defensive and unwilling to welcome your presence even. And so it's important to be respectful and gentle in approaching that younger self, and to allow them the space to receive you and to give them comfort, and ask them if there's anything you can provide for them. Ask them if they're willing to have a hug, or allow you to be there for them. And then most often what's happening with that younger self is that they don't feel seen or heard or respected or loved or safe. And so to be able to provide that to the younger self is a profound gift to them and to you, because it is ultimately all you. And many times what I see is that the younger self is comforted, and then sometimes grows up. Like you can be present for that younger self growing up, and oftentimes there's also a unification, a merging of the younger self and the contemporary self. And it's such, whether we consider that it's an imaginary device, or we consider that we're able in some way to shift into different dimensions of consciousness, whatever it is, it's a powerful, powerful way to transform a relationship with oneself and with those things that trigger us. So I encourage you to try to create this kind of connection with this other dimension of your being. It's really quite magical and remarkable to see the changes that occur, the healing that can occur, because really our memory is something that we are reconstructing in any given moment. So when we're remembering something, we are reassembling it. And those memories are quite mutable. There are so many studies that have been done on memory to show the fallibility of it. And so we can also be looking at not just the fallibility of memory, but the malleability of memory. And when we remember things from a different context. So for instance, if we go back and experience something that we experienced as a child as really frightening and negative, we can go back as an adult and see that situation from different perspectives that can then inform the child. And meantime, the child in its way has been running the show for however many years. And now with new information, that child can experience a new feeling, a new relationship to that circumstance. And it's truly, truly magical to see how profoundly this, you could consider it a trick of mind, a sleight of mind, like a sleight of hand. But good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you joining us this morning. We're talking about reactivity. and how we can release it and diffuse it, and how that when we're reactive, we're not in the present, and we often exacerbate situations. So if we feel threatened in a situation, by being in that space of feeling threatened, we often escalate the threat through our behavior, sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost, where our defensiveness creates a greater offensiveness on the part of another, for example. So we were talking about being able to go back into time in our imaginal space. And I'm not saying imaginary, I'm saying imaginal, where it's something more than pure imagination. It's a way that we get to speak with our other than conscious mind that is running the show most of the time, and to then reshape the context from which we experienced something, to now open that experience into another dimension where we can actually heal. And it's remarkable how that kind of process then percolates forward in time into our present. So by allowing our traumatized child to experience a greater sense of safety and healing, we can then bring that safety and healing into our present. It just trickles into the present, relieving us and freeing us from the grasp of a past that was perceived by from a very different perspective, from the perspective of a child, for example. So another thing that we can do to alleviate our reactivity is, first off, if we're going into a situation that we know is generally a challenging situation, we can set our intentions ahead of time. We don't always know that we're going to be going into a situation where we'll be triggered, but there are many circumstances when we do know ahead of time that we might be susceptible to certain triggers. So by setting intentions ahead of time, that can help to alleviate our reactivity. So maybe we can, instead of just diving into what could be a very uncomfortable situation, we can set an intention to be patient with ourselves. We can set an intention to allow ourselves to breathe instead of responding automatically. Maybe we can set an intention to count to 3 and take a couple breaths before we respond to something that might be triggering for us. That's another way to deal with it. Another way to diffuse our reactivity sometimes is just to speak what's going on for us. You know, is like, I'm feeling really fragile now, for example. Maybe can I ask you to be especially gentle with me? Or you know, I just want you to know that I'm feeling a bit delicate, or whatever, you know. So sometimes that helps. Or when something occurs and you feel triggered, sometimes to say, wow, I feel really triggered by that, instead of just launching into the activity or the behavior, the response that is the reactive response, to just acknowledge, wow, I just got really triggered. And that can kind of break the cycle and give you an opportunity to choose. So the counting to 3, or the taking a breath, or the announcing, I feel really reactive right now, or triggered, all of those things help to kind of break the cycle. It's called a pattern interrupt, rather than just launching into the reactivity. And even if you do launch into the reactivity, there's a moment at which you might notice, and you can say, oh, wow, I just realized I just went on automatic pilot there. I got really reactive. And that can shift the whole dynamic, where oftentimes if we get reactive, what happens is that the whole situation escalates, things accelerate, and can become more volatile. But if we can find ways to interrupt that pattern, which is really what we're talking about, whether we go and talk to our child self, or whether we count to 3, or we do something to break the pattern. So sometimes we can be in an altercation or something that's reactive, and rather than continuing to engage, sometimes it's good to just get up and walk away, and maybe even to announce, instead of just getting up and walking away in a huff, just being able to announce, I need to go catch my breath for a minute, or I just need to step away for a minute. And that again is another kind of pattern interrupt. There's some people who are really, really talented socially and with humor, to be able to create a pattern interrupt by making an appropriate joke, or maybe an inappropriate joke that just breaks the pattern and creates laughter and releases tension that way. That's not ever been my strong suit, but some people are really brilliant with that, to be able to just diffuse a situation with humor. Humor is a wonderful gift, to be able to break out of reactivity and break out of these patterned type responses that we can get so engaged in. Taking a time out for yourself can be a really, really helpful thing, to say, oh, I need a time out, just calling a truce for a moment, or stepping away. And the thing is that whatever is going to bring us conscious, whether it's announcing what's going on for us, or just changing your position, standing up versus staying seated, for instance, or sitting down versus standing up. Sometimes, just the change of physiology, our bodily position can diffuse our reactivity, can shift it. Breathing certainly can shift it. And the thing about reactivity that's kind of, it becomes kind of a runaway train. We, in our reactivity, we often complicate or accelerate the situation that we're trying to avoid, that we are trying to protect ourselves from. The more protected we are, the more awkward things become, and it becomes a pretty rapidly flowing downward spiral. So Rosalind says, no response is my go-to. Often I do not know what the appropriate thing to say or do. I get that, Rosalind, and sometimes no response is a good thing. And sometimes just saying, I don't know what to say is also a good thing. Just announcing what's going on, because somebody, the other person that you're engaged with, could very easily misinterpret your silence. So saying I don't know what to say can be something that diffuses that tension also. So Rosalind says this is related to an individual who has mental health issues. So he says many things that don't make sense. Wow, Rosalind, I hear that. That's got to be challenging. And I wonder if saying I don't know what to say, if that would alleviate things in any way. It may make things worse. So that's certainly for your judgment. But oftentimes we just shrink away from situations, and it's a form of self-defense, even to shrink away or to become smaller. Like a lot there are animals that roll up, and I think people do the same thing sometimes. And so the antidote is presence. The question is, how do we get ourselves back to a place of presence? And these little hacks are ways that we can maybe start to bring ourselves back to ourselves, so that we can operate from choice rather than from automatic pilot. And that's the intention, is to be able to be in a place of presence, in a place of choice, and to not be run by automated kinds of programs. So that, I think, is it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel, and at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And as always, I'm just so grateful to you for sharing your hearts and sharing this time and being willing to look at what sometimes are challenging questions or issues. And until next time, so